Candace Lane Rogers. Candace Lane Rogers, a 9-year-old girl attending Holmes Elementary School, lived with her mother in Spokane, Washington. On March 6, 1959, Candace was out selling mints for her Camp Fire Girl Scout troop in the neighborhood when she suddenly disappeared. Later that evening, after Candace failed to return home, her mother reported her missing. A massive search was launched with police officers, volunteers, and family members all scouring the neighborhood and surrounding areas in hopes of finding her. Helicopters were also called in to search from above, and sadly, during the search, one of the helicopters crashed, resulting in 3 casualties. 12 hours later, a police officer found 6 boxes of mints scattered near a bridge. However, there was no sign of Candace. Police would receive more than 750 tips in the following days, but none of them panned out. Her case was covered in the media, and her mother appealed to anyone who could help them provide any information into her disappearance, but to no avail. Then 16 days later, 2 hunters found Candace's shoes while hunting groundhogs in the remote woods. They notified police, and soon a search of the area found the body of Candace. She was found 12 miles away from her home. She had been buried under a pile of pine needles and brush. Her legs had been tied together at the ankles with parts of her own slip. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with a piece of her own slip. Over the years, several people confessed to the murder of the child, but none of the confessions were credible. Alfred Graves and James Howard Barnett were considered suspects, but they committed suicide shortly after. The only prime suspect was Hubian Morse. Morse was a convicted serial killer and had murdered 2 Spokane women in a killing spree between 1959 and 1961. In 1955, he was charged for attempted molestation of 28-year-old girls while they were selling Girl Scout cookies in Fairfield, California. He was admitted to a Atascadero State Mental Hospital for therapy and released as cured in January of 1957. Morse submitting to killing 3 women but denied that he had anything to do with Candace's murder. In 2001, investigators were able to retrieve an unknown male's DNA from Candace's clothing. A DNA test ruled Morse out as a suspect. Police interviewed multiple suspects over the last 6 decades, but none were ever charged. In 2020, the investigators reached out to a Texas-based company, Orem Labs, who were able to build a DNA profile. The DNA profile was entered into genealogy databases, and investigators found 3 possible suspects. The suspects were all brothers but were already dead. Police learned that only one of the brothers, John Ray Hoff, had had children. The police then contacted Hoff's daughter, who agreed to provide a DNA sample. A DNA test revealed that it was 2,900,000 times more likely that Hoff's daughter was a genealogical match to the DNA sample found at the crime scene. Police then exhumed Hoff's body, and a DNA test subsequently identified John Ray Hoff as the killer. John Ray Hoff was 20 years old in 1959 and was never a suspect in Candace's murder. Hoff was a troubled teenager, and at the age of 16 he ran away from a state boys training camp near Olympia. Authorities captured Hoff and 3 other boys near Yakima. His troubles would continue even after he was married and had children. In 1970, Hoff committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. In an eerie coincidence, police learned that Candace and Hoff were both buried in the same cemetery. It was also discovered by investigators that Hoff's stepsister was Candace's big sister in her Girl Scout campfire group. Hoff's wife and daughter later took Hoff's body from the cemetery to give Candace's family some privacy. After 62 years, the case was finally solved, though it brought little peace to anyone involved. Moving on to the next case. Silas Jane. On July 2, 1966, the peaceful atmosphere of Indiana Dunes State Park turned tragic when 3 young women disappeared in broad daylight while relaxing on the beach. What was meant to be a joyful celebration of Independence Day quickly turned into a massive manhunt. The women, Renee Brull, maiden name Slanico, 19, a tall figure at 5 feet 9 inches, with brown hair and hazel eyes, along with her 2 companions, were last seen lounging in the serene surroundings of the park, which was famed for its stunning beaches, dunes, and natural beauty. But their day of relaxation would be abruptly interrupted by an unknown force, and the 3 women vanished without a trace. The location? once a serene and popular spot for both locals and tourists to enjoy the lake and lush surroundings, soon became a crime scene. The women's disappearance on the 4th of July weekend was met with confusion and fear, as a community already reveling in the holiday now faced the dark mystery. This case remains unsolved, leaving many unanswered questions about what happened to the three women and why they were targeted. She was last seen wearing a ruffled yellow bathing suit. And Miller, 21, was 5 feet 2 inches with brown hair and blue eyes. She was last seen wearing a two-piece bathing suit with a red belt. Patricia Blau, 19, was 5 feet 4 inches with brown hair and brown eyes, last seen in her bathing suit which was brown with green flowers and golden leaves. These three close friends made the 60-mile drive together from their respective homes in the Chicago area and arrived at the lake around 10 a.m. and parked their car, a Buick owned by a Miller, in the lot about 100 yards from where they would set up their towel. While it was the start of a busy weekend, with the park's service estimating 9,000 people in attendance that day, the girls did not go completely unnoticed. A couple noticed them at noon that same day leave their things, including a transistor radio and a jar of tanning lotion on their beach blanket, and enter the waters of the lake. Soon after entering the lake, the couple witnessed the three ladies speaking with a man who was on a 14 to 16-foot boat. Soon after they began speaking to him, they boarded his boat, which had an outboard motor and blue interior, and reportedly they headed west. The couple thought nothing of this series of actions until around dusk that same day when they noticed all the girls' belongings still laying on the beach where they had been left many hours before. This drew the couple's suspicions as it seemed the girls had abandoned their valuables, which park rangers would later learn included cash and their car keys, and left them vulnerable to theft. The couple was so stricken by the strange behavior of the girls, having left their belongings on the beach as night fell, that they alerted a park ranger. The park ranger collected the girls, including their cigarettes, car keys, and wallets with money still in them, and stowed them safely away at the park superintendent's office, where they sat until the investigation into the girls' disappearances officially began. It was Renee's father who first raised the alarm of the missing woman, when by July 4th, 2 days later, he hadn't heard from them. Renee had specifically planned on being back before the evening of July 2nd, as she stated that she had intended to cook dinner for her husband. After families of the three women filed missing person reports, park rangers went searching for the car that they arrived in and found it still sitting in the same parking space in the parking lot. Once an official search started on July 5th, more witnesses came forward having recalled seeing the girls boarding a boat. One beach tour offered his camera footage from the day, and based on those reels, police were able to pinpoint 2 boats that they believed could be involved. One was a 16 to 18-foot boat captained by a single man fitting the witness description of the man the women were seen speaking with, tan with dark hair. The other was a larger boat, 26 to 28 feet, being operated by 3 men. Both boats showed in the camera's footage had 3 female passengers on them, matching the features of the ladies. So both were considered possibilities. In fact, authorities believe that both images, taken almost 3 hours apart, could be of the women, as some witnesses say the smaller boat dropped the girls off on shore where they may have been seen eating and walking in the sand, before being approached by a separate unknown male. After talking to this separate man, all 4 were picked up by the other larger boat, a cabin cruiser, this time with 2 other men on it. Many believed it was strange that Renee's husband of 15 months didn't call in a missing persons report sooner. Rumors circulated after a note was found in Renee's purse from that day, addressed to her husband. The note complained that the husband had his priorities misaligned and that he spent too much time fixing hot rod cars with friends and not enough time on their marriage. Friends and family of the couple, though, say there were no major marriage problems and that Renee probably wrote that note when she was feeling angry in order to vent, and the fact that it was still in her purse confirms she never gave it to her husband. Renee was the only married woman of the group, but not the only one with personal problems. And Miller had told friends a few days prior that she was 3 months pregnant. She discussed her plans to enter a house for unwed mothers. She had been having an affair with a married man and, therefore, could not be with him. It is also rumored that Patricia, the third friend, was also pregnant, also by a married man. Based on these pregnancy rumors, there is a theory that the women were actually scheduled to have illegal abortions that day. One fact that substantiates this rumor is the sighting of Ralph Largo Jr., whose physical traits matched the description of the man on the boat. He confirmed he was at the beach that day. Largo's aunt, with whom he lived, was in the business of performing illegal abortions for women in need. Did the woman board the boat in order to get the procedure done secretly, as it was illegal at the time in that state? Some wonder if the procedure went awry and caused the death of the girls, which needed to be covered up. But then what happened to Renee? Was she pregnant too? That would be a huge coincidence. Or did she witness the deaths and need to be quieted as well? Ralph Largo Jr. died in 2009, so he can provide no answers. Another theory is that the boat they were on encountered trouble and crashed. Some debris from an apparent boating accident were found near Bailey Generating Station of Northern Indiana Public Service Company on Lake Michigan a few days after July 2nd. However, the families of the three girls say that accidental drowning was not likely, as all three girls were experienced swimmers. In fact, Patricia was known to be able to swim 20 miles in one day with and having similar skills. There's another angle to this case, the so-called horse syndicate connection. This theory involves the three ladies' common love, riding and caring for horses. All three ladies frequented the Tricolor stables in Palatine, Illinois, and knew George Jane, who was a well-known and wealthy horse dealer. George Jane had a bitter feud over horse finances with his brother, Silas Jane, a notorious leader of the so-called horse syndicate, an underground club of some sort that dealt with the buying, selling, and betting of racehorses. The brothers' frequent and intense fighting had actually resulted in the death of a young woman months prior. Cheryl Enrod, a successful equestrian, was asked by George to move his Cadillac for him. But in carrying out this task for him, she got into a car that was rigged with explosives. The car bomb was triggered by the engine starting and Cheryl was killed instantly. The bomb was thought to be placed by an associate of Silas's and meant for George as retaliation for some horse-related feud they had been having. Court documents show that the prosecution believed an arsonist was paid $10,000 to place the bomb that killed Cheryl, and the arsonist was subsequently sentenced to life in prison almost 30 years after the actual crime. George was so fearful of a subsequent car bomb attack that he rigged a tool that could turn on a car's ignition without physically getting in the vehicle. It is theorized that the three missing women may have witnessed the planting of this bomb or some other nefarious act, and that their deaths were related to the incident. The girls also rode at Silas' stable, even though they boarded their horses at George's stable. For months prior, when Renee came home with a facial injury, she cryptically blamed the laceration on issues with the syndicate people. Additionally, the phone numbers of both George and Silas Shane were found among the girls' abandoned possessions. Eliminating witnesses would not be out of character for Silas Jane, who was known to be cold-blooded, cunning, and brutal. The owner of a rival horse training business, Idle Hour Stable, he had a reputation for taking advantage of the young women of rich Chicago parents who desired to learn to ride and had no shame in mixing his criminal activities with his stable. Silas is connected to numerous felonies, including the rape of a young woman while he was a teenager, conspiracy to kill his brother George, covering up his employee's murder of 3 young boys known as the Peterson-Schulitzer murders, and a shootout with police that resulted in the death of an officer. Silas is also connected to the death of an older woman, Helen Brock, who spent over $250,000 on horses and may have gotten caught up with Silas's horse gang, known sometimes as the Horse Syndicate and other times as the Jane Gang. Silas was said to be a sociopath with early childhood proclivities for murder. At the young age of 8, he was bitten by a goose on his family farm and was so enraged that he killed each and every goose on the property. At least 11 horse deaths are also connected to him, and he seemed to take his anger at his brother out on his brother's prized horses, including the burning of 10 of them alive in George's barn. He also injected 1 prize-winning mare with turpentine. Given the long list of deaths that followed his career, it is not hard to imagine him being involved with the missing women. George, his brother, was shot to death while at his son's birthday party. The mysterious disappearance of the 3 women at Indiana Dunes State Park in 1966 remains one of the state's most haunting unsolved cases. In a bizarre twist, Silas, a man with a known criminal background, allegedly told the sheriff before his death in 1987 that he had buried 3 bodies under his stable. However, before any investigation could be launched, the sheriff tragically died in a farming accident. And no one ever followed up on this chilling statement. Further complicating the case, Silas owned a boat that matched the descriptions of when the women were reportedly seen boarding, raising suspicions about his possible involvement. Despite his dark past, there is no solid evidence directly linking him to the women's disappearance. With no bodies found and the absence of concrete clues, the case remains frustratingly unresolved. Though it remains open, the investigation is inactive and the families of the missing women continue to hope that new evidence will emerge to finally provide answers. Until then, the case lingers as a haunting reminder of the unknown fate of the 3 young women. Moving on to the next case. Helen Brzezinski, a 20-year-old woman from Massachusetts, was studying at Wheaton College in her home state. In January 1980, she moved to Colorado to work as an intern at a Denver radio station, embarking on the beginning of her adult life. Helen was living with a friend at her aunt's house in Englewood, Colorado. On January 16, 1980, Helen went to work. After work, she took the bus like usual. She was not seen again after leaving the bus station. Helen's aunt got worried when she did not arrive home and reported her missing. It did not take long for police to find her. Her body was found the next day in a field. She had been stabbed, investigators believed, as she was abducted right after she left the bus station. DNA from a male was found at a crime scene. Unfortunately, in 1980, DNA technology was not very advanced and they could not identify the man. They did, however, store the DNA so they can one day use it again when DNA technology has advanced. Helen did not know a lot of people in the area since she only lived there for 2 weeks and did not have any known enemies. Investigators did not receive a lot of leads and the case went cold. In 1998, the DNA were uploaded to her database after a DNA profile could be created, but it did not match to anyone. In 2017, her case was reopened and investigators tried again to solve her case. They uploaded the DNA to jetmatch.com and phoned a couple of potential family members of the suspect. One of the family members they came across was Rob Deal. Rob was very eager to help. He explained his entire family tree as best he could and gave them a sample of his DNA. The investigators then used the help of C.C. Moore and Parabon Nanolabs to find a family member who would give them an exact match. In December 2019, they really narrowed it down to James Curtis Glanton. He was a very distant cousin of Rob. James was a truck driver living in Lake Butler, Florida. Investigators saw that he had a criminal history and found that he was on parole for an assault in Arkansas after serving 4 years in prison in 1980. He was released to live in a Denver home of a former counselor who offered to help him. This meant that he was in the area when Helen's life was taken, and that he had a violent history. Investigators followed James for a few weeks. They retrieved a beer mug that he was drinking from at a bar. The DNA was tested and it was an exact match. Early in 2020, James was arrested. We're now also looking into other possible crimes he could be responsible for. Helen's sister, Janet Johnson, is now the only living close relative of Helen. At 70 years old, Janet was overjoyed to hear news about the case and expressed her deep love for her sister. "I want people to know what a special person Helen was. She was my best friend and she had a bright future ahead of her," Janet shared. Moving on to the next case. Kelly and Workman was a 24-year-old woman living with her parents in Douglas County, Missouri. Described as quiet, independent, and determined, Kelly was the daughter of dairy farmers and was always willing to help with farm tasks. To supplement her income, she offered lawn care and maintenance services, often working on yards and properties in the Dogwood area. On June 30, 1989, Kelly was mowing the grass at Dogwood Cemetery, located next to Pleasant Southern Baptist Church. Known for her attention to detail, she carefully mowed around the rows of headstones and used trimmers to cut stray blades of grass around each marker. This was a routine task for Kelly, but it would tragically mark the last day she was seen alive. She began her work at 3:30 p.m. and at around 5 p.m., it started raining. So, Kelly went home to feed the calves while her parents milked the cows at their rented Seymour farm. When the rain stopped at 5:40, Kelly was back at the cemetery. Her uncle saw her mowing as he drove past the lot on Missouri 14 in Douglas County. This was the last time Kelly was ever seen alive. 20 minutes later, with less than half of the job completed, it appears that Kelly left the mower beside a tombstone and disappeared from the cemetery. When she failed to return home for dinner later that night, her parents became worried and reported her missing to the police. However, police told her parents to wait as they suggested Kelly might have run away. Her parents vehemently disagreed as Kelly was dependable and would not have left her work unfinished, nor would she have left her tools simply sitting out in the cemetery. Her parents and friends organized their own searches and soon, despite suggesting that Kelly had run away, the police launched their own countywide search in and around Douglas. Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile was soon found in the church connected to the cemetery's parking lot with its key in the ignition. For several days, the search involved hundreds of volunteers as well as sent tracking dogs and helicopters, which scoured the countryside. However, nothing would be found. Then 7 days later, on July 7th, a farmer and his son in nearby Christian County stumbled upon Kelly's remains submerged in water from the waist down. Her body was found about 10 miles from where she disappeared. She was found fully clothed, but so badly decomposed that it took dental records to identify her. How she died remains murky. Her death certificate merely lists, quote, homicidal violence. Authorities believe that Kelly was abducted from the cemetery with the motive of sexual assault. However, at the time, the autopsy stated she was not sexually assaulted. It was only more recently that investigators confirmed Kelly was indeed sexually assaulted. They say she probably died in the early hours of July 1st. However, due to the advanced state of decomposition, they could neither determine the time nor the cause of death. Kelly's mother, Joan Workman, believes she knows the exact moment Kelly died. She said that after reporting her daughter missing on July 1st at 3:30 a.m., as she sat on the living room couch and worried about Kelly with family and friends, she felt a surge of panic and pain in her chest. She says that she thought to herself, "Hang on, Kelly, hang on." But then she says the feeling passed, leaving her as she described feeling dead inside. Kelly's body was interred at the Dogwood Cemetery, which she so lovingly helped maintain. Kelly's parents harbored frustration towards the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, feeling that had the police treated the case with the gravity it deserved from the onset, there might have been a chance to save Kelly. Their anger stemmed partially from the police's failure to dust Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile Cutlass for fingerprints. Moreover, they expressed disappointment that crucial pieces of information, such as reports of a screaming woman, were overlooked amid the chaos of the initial night. A few months later, Kelly's mother learned that 4 days after Kelly's abduction, an anonymous caller reached out to her home leaving a message with another family member regarding a sighting of someone at the Workman residence on the afternoon of the abduction. Surprisingly, the caller did not reach out to any law enforcement agencies involved, and Joan believes that her daughter might have known her abductor or abductors. A reward of $10,000 was offered. Police questioned several suspects over the years, but no one was ever charged. There were 2 suspects who were repeatedly questioned in Kelly's murder: Dwight and Bobby Banks. Dwight and Bobby Banks were 2 brothers who had been pulled over by a Missouri Highway Patrol officer in 1990 as they were traveling down the highway in a pickup truck on the night of Kelly's disappearance. It is unclear why they were initially suspected in Kelly's murder, but Dwight Banks was asked by police to take a polygraph test regarding the murder, and he agreed to take it. He reportedly passed the test. A few years later, Dwight alongside his brother Bobby again became suspects after Dwight reportedly confessed to several people that he murdered Kelly. In a 1995 article from the Springfield News Leader, it was reported that Dwight had confessed multiple times to killing Kelly. However, he later asserted that these confessions were made in jest, attributing them to him being under the influence of alcohol at the time. Dwight admitted that he and Bobby saw Kelly just a few hours before she was abducted when she had been working, but he said he did not kill her. Dwight Banks added that his brother Bobby is also innocent. At the time of Kelly's disappearance, Dwight Banks told the news leader that he and Bobby were at his house eating fried chicken. However, the newspaper, the News Leader, also reported that authorities have been told that Dwight Banks may have taken drugs before the 1990 polygraph examination, which he had passed. Later, Dwight's brother Bobby asked an ex-girlfriend of his to provide an alibi for him for the evening Kelly went missing, which she later reported to police. It was reported that Bobby Banks failed polygraph tests, which Dwight Banks attributed to his brother's frail emotions. 9 years later, the Missouri Highway Patrol Crime Lab issued a warrant for 2 men, one of which was Dwight seeking DNA evidence allegedly connecting him to the killing. However, the tests did not yield any conclusive findings. On February 20, 2024, authorities said at a news conference that 3 men had been arrested and indicted on charges of first-degree murder, along with charges of forcible rape and first-degree kidnapping. The 3 men were identified as Wiley Belt and the initial suspects, brothers Dwight Banks and Bobby Banks. The case took a major turn when an eyewitness from the community bravely came forward, providing critical evidence that enabled investigators to present the case to a grand jury. This led to the arrest of 3 men, all in their mid-60s at the time. The suspects, identified as the Banks brothers and a man named Belt, are currently being held at the Douglas County Jail in Ava. Each of them faces a $250,000 cash bond while awaiting further legal proceedings. The community's involvement played a crucial role in bringing the case closer to justice. Moving on to the next case. Akia Edelstein. At just 22 years old, Akia Edelstein was a devoted mother living in Baltimore, Maryland, in 2017. She had a young daughter and was expecting another child with 36-year-old Michael Robertson. On May 7, 2017, concerns swept through her family when Akia failed to appear at her own baby shower. It was soon uncovered that she had last been seen alive on May 3, 2017, 24 days before her family reported her missing. Investigators decided to create a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance, and also took a closer look at her unborn baby's father, Michael Robertson. Akia and Robertson first met in the 1990s when his grandmother babysat her as a child. They reconnected in 2016 and began dating. At the same time, Robertson was in a relationship with a 22-year-old woman. That woman had recently given birth to the couple's second child. Investigators learned that Achiel was under the impression that she was going to move in with Robertson and was excited about it. Robertson sent her pictures of an apartment interior on May 2, 2017. About 1:24 p.m. that day, Akia purchased 2 money orders totaling $450 after making several ATM withdrawals from her savings account. Moments later, Akia messaged Robertson on Facebook. "Called you. I got the money order." That afternoon, Akia unsuccessfully attempted to withdraw cash twice from an ATM at a Wells Fargo location downtown. Akia and Robertson were texting back and forth on May 3. That day, Akia was seen on surveillance video depositing the 2 money orders and a paycheck from her employer at a BB&T location in the Central Business District. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Then she withdrew $450. Akia told a bank employee, whom she knew from high school, that she had to cash the orders because the property manager only takes cash. It is believed she was referring to the property that Robertson told her they are moving into. At about 4 p.m., Robertson took a lift order by Akia to the Cherry Hill neighborhood. Phone records indicate Robertson was in the area near Akia's residence from 5:35 p.m. to 6:18 p.m. At about 5:22 p.m., Akia sent a friend an invite to her baby shower on the following Sunday. It was her last known communication. Phone records show a telemarketer tried to call Akia at 6:57 p.m. At that time, both her phone and Robertson's phone were located downtown. Akia's phone activity ends there, indicating that the device was turned off or disabled. Using a reverse image search, investigators determined the apartment picture Robertson had sent the day before was a completely different residence from the one he had named. Investigators learned of a volatile argument between Robertson and the mother of his children the night before Akia disappeared. When investigators looked at what could have sparked the argument, they saw that evening Akia shared a sonogram picture on Facebook. On the day of Akia's shower, Family members said that they found her apartment nearly clean out. Police first thought that this was a clue that she walked off on her own. That was before they learned that Robertson made Akia believe that they were going to move in together. Robertson was interviewed several times during the investigation, but notably has displayed a consistent pattern of hiding or avoiding police contact for weeks or months at a time between interviews. During an interview on June 15, 2017, he claimed he saw Akia on Monday, May 1st. But we know that this is false because of the phone records. In July of 2017, a police spokesman said that investigators no longer believe that she walked off on her own and had come to believe that there was foul play. After years of collecting all the telephone records, financial records, social media messages, and conducting multiple interviews, investigators had enough evidence to arrest Michael Robertson in connection to Akia's disappearance. Authorities arrested Robertson and charged him with taking Akia's life on February 1, 2022. 2 days later, on February 3, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby held a press conference to announce the arrest of Robertson. Mosby said, "Give a special thanks to the family of Akia Eggleston for never giving up in their pursuit of justice for Akia and her unborn child." The state's attorney office released the full statement of probable cause in Akia's case. It reads as follows: based on her pattern of life, the time passed, extensive publicity, and multiple searches and monetary rewards for information in this case, the document stated the fact that Akia has not returned to her family or been electronically or physically located overwhelmingly indicates that she is in fact deceased. The document details Akia's last days as revealed by interviews, financial records, telephone records, and social media communications, and alleges that the investigation revealed the only person with the motive, means, an opportunity to take Akia's life was the purported father of her unborn child, Michael Robertson. While Akia's body has not been found, the statement of probable cause revealed that in October of 2017, following the airing of a local television news report on Akia's case, Robertson's Google searches for "where does Baltimore City trash go when picked up," Baltimore City dumpster pickup, and Baltimore City landfill indicate what may have happened to her remains. Michael Robertson is being held on bond in Michigan, where he currently resides. In its press release, the Baltimore State's Attorney's Office stated that Robertson faces a maximum penalty of 2 life sentences in prison if found guilty of all charges. Supervisor Special Agent Shane Buchwald with the FBI of Baltimore also spoke. "For nearly 5 years, the people of Baltimore have searched, hoped, and mourned with Akia's family and friends," she said. "But they never gave up, and neither did we." Buchenwald added that while Akia's body still hasn't been found, "We hope this arrest brings a level of comfort and closure to Akia's family." Members of Akia's family also addressed the media. "Thank you to everyone for their thoughts and their prayers," Akia's aunt, Synovia Wilson, said, "for keeping hope for our family that we would find her alive, even though the evidence says something different, that she's not. We just want to say thank you and just to please continue to keep us in your prayers." Akia's stepfather, Sean Wilkinson, took to the podium to thank the investigation agencies who worked on Akia's case. He also brought attention to an issue that is all too common. "Domestic violence is real, and when it happens, we need to address it," said Wilkinson. The family remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice for Akia. Her case has profoundly impacted their lives and relationships, but they stand united, vowing to persist until the final judgment is rendered. William and Ina Campbell. William and Ina Campbell, a couple in their 80s, lived peacefully in their home on Jackson Road in Clarksville, Tennessee in 2010. On January 29, 2010, their neighbor, Daniel Champagne, who had a close bond with the Campbells and considered them like second parents, tried calling them several times. Daniel, who also had a key to their house, became concerned when he couldn't get in touch with them. So when they did not answer any of his calls, he went inside. He found that the house had been ransacked. The kitchen cabinets were all open. Daniel also made a gruesome discovery. He found William and Ina in their bedrooms, each with a gunshot wound to the head. They had medical issues and slept in separate beds. Ina still had her oxygen tube inside her nose when he found her. It was determined that their lives were taken while they were sleeping. Neighbors told investigators that this is strange. as their dogs would have barked if a stranger came in and woke the Campbells up. It led investigators to believe that the person responsible knew the dogs and the couple. Their adopted son, William Roger Campbell, then became a person of interest. It was speculated that he would gain financially from the crime. No evidence that he took his parents' lives could be found, however, and the case went cold. Then, on June 21st, William Roger Campbell was arrested at his home in connection with the case and taken to Clarksville. He was taken to the Montgomery County Jail. Investigators did not initially give the reason of why he was arrested, but you have to believe that his appearance does not help his case. Detective Keenan Carlton had this to say: "These were innocent victims. These were people who were beloved by their community. They lived in their neighborhood for a number of years. Their neighbors loved them, and they're all happy to see some resolution." Keenan gave credit to detectives who worked the case a decade ago for laying the groundwork in the investigation, and said a recent review of the case allowed detectives to put the final piece of the puzzle together and arrest Campbell. His trial started in January of 2023. During the trial, it was mentioned how Campbell profited financially from the crime. Bill Campbell's estate was worth well over $130,000, and his wife Ina's estate was over $120,000. Altogether, their sole Roger Campbell received $180,000 from his parents' estate. It was also made public that he was seen leaving the crime scene just 40 minutes after police believed Bill and Ina's lives were taken. The fact that the dogs didn't bark was also brought up, as well as the fact that no valuables were touched. Jewelry boxes appeared undisturbed. Lock boxes had not been tampered with. Approximately $2,800 was still there. Checks remained on the dining room table, and most shockingly, the guns were also all there. The son of Campbell, Sean, described having a close relationship with his late grandparents, but had only seen his father a handful of times growing up. "I've been on this earth 35 years, and in that 35 years, I've spent less than 24 hours around him," Sean Campbell said. After the funerals of Bill and Ina Campbell, Sean Campbell was made aware of an estate auction that took place at the Campbell's residence. According to him, he was never contacted by his father to keep any of his grandparents' items as keepsakes. Linda Campbell, ex-wife of Campbell and mother of Sean, also testified. At the time, she worked at the commissary. On January 26, 2010, 3 days before the bodies were found, Linda was paged to Register 17, where she was startled to see Campbell and his mother, Ina. Before then, she hadn't seen or spoken to him in almost 13 years. Campbell struck up a conversation with her and told her he was in town visiting and would be leaving on 28th. "I thought, why do I care when you're leaving?" Linda Campbell said. She had never been paged by Ina, William, or Roger before then. It appeared as if Campbell wanted to create an alibi. Agent Frederick McClintock, a CPD drug agent and crime scene investigator in 2010, said that during their detailed search of a crime scene, he found a bottle of palmolive dish soap with a red-brown material on the back that appeared to be blood. In a field test swab, the material tested positive for blood. Later, this blood was identified through DNA to be Roger Campbell's. Bill and Ina Campbell owned an antique Lenskirch grandfather clock, and according to Andrew Smith, owner of its time clock shop, it was rare. Smith holds a degree in horology, which is the study and measurement of time. He had serviced the Campbell's grandfather clock for many years, visiting the home to perform maintenance annually. When he first laid eyes on the clock, he said he offered Bill Campbell $5,000 for it. Coincidentally, in front of Roger Campbell. Bill turned him down, saying he knew the clock was rare and antique, and he wasn't willing to part with it. In February of 2010, less than a month after Bill and Ina's lives were taken, Smith received a call asking if he was interested in buying the Lenskirch grandfather clock. When he arrived at the Campbell residence, Smith expressed his excitement to the courtroom that he was finally going to be able to buy the clock. However, instead of his normal customers, he was met by Roger Campbell. "I said, 'Where's your mom and dad?' Smith told the court. He seemed nervous and shaky and said, 'Didn't you hear? Mom and dad were shot in their bedrooms.'" On January 23, 2023, after about 4 hours of deliberation, 66-year-old Roger Campbell was found guilty of taking the lives of his own parents, William and Ina Campbell in Clarksville, Tennessee. The evidence presented during the trial showed that Roger attempted to take control of his parents' estate by insisting that he was the sole heir and pressuring a neighbor to finalize the transaction. Now, Roger awaits sentencing for his actions. Moving on to the next case. The Tandar case, the horrifying crime you're referring to, occurred in 1995 in New Delhi, India, and is known as the Tandar murder. The story is chilling and grotesque, where a man, initially seen as a loving husband, became a murderer in a way that shocked the nation. His wife, Leela, had reportedly been the victim of continuous abuse and manipulation before this gruesome act. The man, who was a cook by profession, used the Tandar oven, a traditional clay oven used in cooking, during the crime. After killing his wife, he placed her body in the oven, grilling her at high temperatures. To make the act even more horrifying, he used butter to cook her body, making it unrecognizable. The case shocked the public not only because of the cruelty involved but also due to the betrayal of trust in a marriage. This case remains one of the most infamous in India's criminal history, largely due to the horrifying method of murder and the cold-bloodedness of the act. This is India's most infamous true crime story, which unfolded between the prominent areas of Connaught Place and Karabag, situated in New Delhi. The region around Ashoka Road and Janpath Road near Karabag in New Delhi is a bustling neighborhood, characterized by its blend of residential serenity and commercial vigor. Known for its diverse community and lively atmosphere, this place offers diverse cultures, traditions, and modern conveniences. Ashoka Road leads directly to the majestic India Gate, while the Janpath area is known for hosting local cuisines and bustling markets. The area boasts a mix of residential complexes, local markets, and small businesses that cater to the daily needs of its residents. It mostly thrives with the presence of various eateries serving delectable local cuisine, adding a flavorful essence to the neighborhood. And one such famous place was Bhajia Barbecue Restaurant in Hotel Ashoka Yatri Niwas, which later became the Hotel Indraprastha. However, this renowned restaurant was soon to become the center stage for a chilling incident that would later be recognized: the Tandar case. Around 11:25 p.m. on July 2, 1995, Ashoka Road in Janpath, New Delhi was getting quieter. Two policemen, Constable Abdul Nazir Kunju and Home Guard Chandler Powell, were patrolling the area. As they got closer to the Asha Jayatri Niwas Hotel, Kunju noticed flames coming from some nearby buildings. Concerned about a potential fire outbreak, the duo swiftly embarked on an investigation. Kunju made his way towards the main entry gate of Yatri Niwas, making a beeline for the front of the Bhajia Barbecue restaurant situated on the left, just inside the hotel's main entryway. From this vantage point, he observed flames emanating from the rear kitchen area of Bhajia. As he approached, a uniformed security guard intercepted him, already briefed about the situation. The guard explained that the fire originated from ignited waste paper and cardboard near the outdoor tunder, reassuring Kunju that everything was under control and there was no cause for alarm. Satisfied with the explanation, policeman Kunju and Chanpal proceeded to walk away towards jump-off lane. As they began to move, Anaru Devi, a middle-aged vegetable vendor often seen showcasing her produce beside the Mother Dairy Milk booth at the lane's entrance from Ashoka Road, hurriedly approached them. With her voice trembling in fear, Anaru exclaimed about the hotel being on fire. Her panicked outcry had attracted the attention of several men nearby who also began to raise the alarm. Kunju realized how serious the situation had become upon seeing the size of the fire. The flames were already clearly visible from the lane, showing that it was more than just a small fire, with thick smoke soaring high, reaching to about 30 to 35 feet above Bhajia's outer wall on Janpath Lane. Kunju and Chanda hurried back to the closed restaurant's entrance. By that time, Kunju started quietly cursing as he expressed his frustration, mentioning that those involved were attempting to burn the entire hotel down. Kunju then moved beyond the hotel entrance and approached the canvas screen situated in front of the Bhajia Barbecue. Upon lifting the screen and gazing into the dimly lit restaurant, he encountered a slender man, approximately in his late 20s or early 30s, standing about 5 feet 10 inches tall and attired in a white kurta, a traditional Indian garment. This man casually informed Kunju that they were just burning some old posters and reassured him that the fire was under control. He mentioned that they had taken adequate precautionary measures, and there was no reason to worry. Despite the man's reassurance, Constable Kunju remained unconvinced. He left Chandrapal near the hotel and quickly made his way to a nearby phone booth, only to find it closed. He then jogged towards the police picket situated at the rear of the Western Court complex, located a couple of 100 meters away. Once there, he urgently relayed a wireless report of the fire to the Conic Place police station and made calls to the police control room and the fire brigade requesting immediate assistance. Upon his return to the hotel, Kunju was dismayed to witness that the blaze had escalated during his absence, with thick smoke rising high above the hotel complex. With Chandra accompanying him, they marched towards the entrance of the restaurant and assertively demanded entry to inspect the fire. Once more, the men at the restaurant refused to allow him entry. Determined, Kanju wouldn't be discouraged this time. Pretending to retreat from the Bagya, he and Chandrapal exchanged secretive words as they walked away together from the front of the hotel. Rushing down Janpath Lane, they swiftly scaled the 7-foot-high wall at the restaurant's rear without hesitation. Clearing the bamboo screen fencing, Kunji managed to enter the covered rear area of the garden restaurant. Without delay, they headed straight for the fire. The fire presented an alarming and disproportionate scene within the kitchen. Fueled by a heap of wooden logs, planks, and assorted materials piled atop the tandoor, it blazed with ferocity. One slender man, the same individual who had earlier dismissed Kunji at the front of the Bajia, was actively fueling the flames using wooden beams and bamboo poles. Another man dressed in a blue-printed shirt and a muscular young man stood nearby. At a distance, adjacent to the canvas screen by the hotel's entrance, stood a robustly built man wearing white. Curiously, these individuals appeared entirely indifferent to the foul smell emanating from the inferno. Kunju warned the man stoking the flames, cautioning him about the potential risk of causing a fire that can engulf the entire hotel. Upon being informed by the individual tending to the fire about his affiliation as a Congress Party worker engaged in burning old materials, including posters and waste paper, Kunju remained composed. Instead of being deterred by the political association, he immediately looked around for a bucket. This marked a moment where the young constable truly showcased his determination. Some individuals might have hesitated upon hearing about the political connection, particularly with the influential Congress Party. They might have offered a mild caution about fire safety before ultimately withdrawing. However, Kun just affirmed. He was alarmed by the considerable blaze before him and, alongside Chandrapal, swiftly gathered any available buckets and containers. They filled these from a nearby kitchen tap and promptly began extinguishing the flames. Soon, Sub-Inspector Rajesh Kumar arrived at the scene just as Kunju and Chandrapal were diligently working to suppress the fire. Interestingly, unlike the attempt to dismiss a constable earlier, no one dared to send a sub-inspector away. Accompanied by 2 security guards from the main hotel, Rajesh and his constables entered the restaurant and joined Kunju in combating the blaze. Working together, they successfully extinguished the fire within a matter of minutes. The intense flames had ignited certain plastic-coated overhead cables, causing further damage. Carrying along the person seemingly responsible for the mischief, Kunju, Sub-Inspector Rajesh Kumar, and the hotel guards proceeded to investigate the extent of the cable damage. Their objective was to determine whether the fire had spread to the building's first floor. They advanced towards the main lobby of Yatri Niwas, which led to the Coconut Grove restaurant. Ascending 2 flights of stairs, they reached the lower split-level first-floor terrace overlooking the Bajia complex. Constable Kunji leaned over the edge of the mezzanine roof in search of the wires that had caught fire. Instead, he was met with a rush of hot air and foul-smelling folk billowing upwards. To his surprise, he noticed that the fire above the tundra, which they had previously extinguished, had reignited. The man he had observed earlier in the Bajia, the sturdy individual clad in white, was once again fueling the flames. Kunju's initial alarm transformed into exasperation at the careless disregard for safety displayed by these people. Hurrying to the rear edge of the roof without considering the steep drop below, he leapt down, landing forcefully on the paved rear courtyard of the restaurant. Swiftly advancing towards the fire, he pushed aside the wicket fence obstructing his way and approached the tandoor from the rear. Upon reaching the kitchen area, Kunji discovered that the man in the kurta pajama and his two companions had vanished, yet the fire continued to rage. It was at this moment that Kunji noticed a peculiar scent. Amidst the pungent and unpleasant odor, a distinct smell of roasted meat filled the air. However, this scent was not of ordinary food cooked. Rather, it carried the unmistakable and haunting odor of burning flesh. When he examined the oven, instead of finding chicken meat being prepared, they came across something profoundly disturbing. The oven contained a human body, dismembered and partially burnt. This unsettling discovery reverberated throughout the city, leaving its residents deeply disturbed and shocked. Now two key questions surfaced. Who might the body have belonged to, and who could have been responsible for this gruesome deed? And so began the quest for information regarding the disturbing Ben Orkan. The dismembered and burned body parts underwent testing, and upon receiving the results, the victim's identity was unveiled. She was 29-year-old Naina Sahini. Naina, a Congress worker in New Delhi, was married to 34-year-old Sushil Sharma, who was also a youth Congress leader. The initial postmortem conducted at Lady Hardinge Medical College in Delhi concluded that the cause of death was burn injuries. Subsequently, a second postmortem was ordered by the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. This examination was carried out by a team of 3 doctors from different hospitals led by T.D. Dogra. During this examination, 2 bullets were discovered in the head and neck region, leading the conclusion that the cause of death was due to firearm injuries. Now, as per protocol, the police intended to meet with Sushil Sharma, but he was nowhere to be located. However, the same fate did not befall the man who was involved in burning the remains at the hotel. The individual responsible for burning the remains was apprehended and identified as Keshav Kumar, the restaurant manager of the Bajia Hotel. It didn't take long for him to disclose the identity of the other person involved, who indeed turned out to be Naina's husband, Sushil Kumar. The case seemed close to resolution almost immediately upon the initial disclosures. Yet the grim and sinister nature of this case cast a long shadow over the city, leaving a haunting impact for a prolonged period. A few days later, on July 10, 1995, Sushil Sharma surrendered. Now all that remained was to uncover the events that transpired on the day Naina was killed and ensure that justice was served. During the interrogation, it was disclosed that Sushil and his wife, Naina, had a friend named Matlab Karim. Matlab and Nina had been classmates and were colleagues in the Congress Party, sharing a close bond. However, Sushil disapproved of Nina's friendship with Milab. Arguments frequently arose between the couple over this issue, but his possessiveness took a much darker turn on the night of July 2, 1995. On that tragic night, upon returning home, Sushil encountered Nina conversing on the phone while consuming alcohol. As Naina noticed Sushil's presence, she ended the call abruptly. In a fit of anger, Sushil redialed the phone and discovered Matlab on the other end of the line. Enraged beyond control and despite Naina's attempts to explain, Sushil fatally shot her. Subsequently, he wrapped the body in a plastic bag, placed it in the trunk of his Maruti 8100 car, and proceeded to transport it to the Bajia barbecue restaurant and conspired with the restaurant manager, Keshav Kumar, to dispose of it. Naina's body was dismembered and then incinerated in a tandoor oven. With this information gathered, along with a few DNA tests to confirm the killer's identity, Sushil Sharma was soon to face the legal proceedings in court. The Delhi police conducted an investigation into the case and submitted a charge sheet on July 27, 1995 in a sessions court. Subsequently, on November 7, 2003, Sushil Sharma was sentenced to death, while the restaurant manager, Keshav Kumar, received 7 years of rigorous imprisonment. Sushil appealed against the district court's verdict in the Delhi High Court, yet the High Court upheld the decisions made by the lower courts. His death sentence was subsequently confirmed by the Delhi High Court in 2007. However, in 2013, the Supreme Court commuted his death sentence, citing the absence of evidence that Sushil had dismembered his wife's body. On October 8, 2013, a three-judge bench consisting of Chief Justice Satya Sivam and Justices Ranjana Desai and Ranjan Gogoi upheld Sharma's conviction. The court reduced his death sentence to life imprisonment due to Sushil's lack of a prior criminal record and the nature of the crime. Although both the trial court and the High Court had ordered Sushil Sharma's execution, the Supreme Court modified the sentence stating, "It is not a crime against society, but a crime committed due to his strained relationship with his wife." On December 21, 2018, the Delhi High Court issued an order for the immediate release of Sushil Sharma. The court questioned whether a person could be detained indefinitely for a murder offense even after completing a designated sentence. However, by that time, Sushil had already been released after serving 23 years in jail. According to Sushil, if he hadn't committed the crime, he believed he could have potentially become a union minister. After his release from jail, Sushil appeared to have changed as a person, yet one cannot really know the truth that lurks beneath the superficial demeanor. The hero who made justice possible, policeman Kunju's life had taken a turn. Kunju, speaking to Times of India, mentioned that he had received only 5 rupees as his reward for his brave actions. Despite making headlines in various media outlets, he now sees the incident as a brief moment of attention. Kunju claimed that the Delhi police did not acknowledge or value his policing abilities, quick response, and vigilance. He opted for voluntary retirement in 2012 and relocated to Kerala to care for his unwell mother. The 51-year-old retired officer shared that while he received an out-of-turn promotion, he was deprived of all the accompanying benefits associated with it. He mentioned being denied a salary increase under the 6-pay commission, highlighting that even lower-ranked constables who joined after him were earning more. Despite holding the position of head constable, Kunju stated that his requests were consistently rejected. On the night of the discovery, Kunji discovered a blood-stained plastic bag nearby containing the remaining parts of Nina's body and was threatened by Sushil and Keshav Kumar. The story you're referencing seems to revolve around a complex case where emotions, power dynamics, and societal pressures played significant roles. In the case of Sushil and Nina, it's clear that insecurity may have been one of the motivating factors for the crime. However, there could have been other underlying reasons, such as jealousy, a sense of betrayal, or even external pressures that push Sushil to commit such a violent act. People who feel threatened by someone, whether it's a partner, a colleague, or an acquaintance, can sometimes act out of irrational fear or possessiveness, leading to tragic consequences. As for the punishment, whether Sushil's sentence was fitting or should have been a death sentence is a matter of perspective. The justice system often aims to balance retribution with rehabilitation. Though in cases involving violent crimes, the victim's family and society may feel that a harsher punishment is warranted. Death sentences, however, are controversial and often debated as they raise ethical concerns about fairness, the potential for wrongful convictions, and the impact on society. Ultimately, the severity of the punishment should reflect not only the crime but also the values of the legal system and society at large. What do you think about the balance between justice and rehabilitation in such cases? Should personal insecurities ever be considered a valid reason for such extreme actions? Harold Wayne Lovell, a troubled 19-year-old in 1977, is an example of how cold cases can sometimes remain unsolved for decades before being resolved. While many cold cases are solved thanks to advancements in forensic evidence, particularly DNA testing, there are cases like Lovell's where the path to resolution may involve piecing together new clues or revisiting old ones. Even though solving such cases often brings families closure, it also means revisiting painful memories during hearings or trials. The evolution of forensic technology, particularly in DNA analysis, has made it possible to solve many cold cases that once seemed hopeless. He lived in Chicago with his parents and 2 siblings. In May 1977, he had an argument with his mother and decided to leave home. Harold told his family he was going to look for a construction job, which he did. He left behind his mother, his stepfather, brother Tim, and sister Teresa. His family didn't hear back from him after he left, and he never returned, so they got worried about him. They got even more worried about Harold when they heard about John Wayne Gacy. Gacy entered the lives of 33 young boys and men in the 1970s. Gacy was arrested in 1978. Gacy also worked at construction sites during that time, and in the same area. He buried lots of victims under his house. 8 of the bodies found under Gacy's Chicago home was not positively identified. In 2011, the police asked all families who believe they are related to one of the 8 unknown victims to come forward and send in their DNA. Howard's 2 siblings, Tim and Teresa, sent in their DNA since they strongly believed Howard was one of the 8 victims. The DNA did not help solve this case. Before the test could be complete, there was a shocking revelation made. Tim and Teresa's nephew found a mugshot on mugshots.com of a person with the name Howard Wayne Lovell. The photo was of a man from Florida who was arrested in 2006 for possessing marijuana. The family quickly tracked Howard down in Florida. Howard immediately came to visit his family. He told them that he did go to work on construction sites. And believe it or not, but he did work with John Wayne Gacy for a while. Used to work in Gacy's garden every now and then. Gacy always tried to get him to come inside the house, but Howard always said no because something felt wrong. Howard was sad to learn that his family thought he was not alive anymore. He never contacted them because he was under the impression they didn't care about him and wouldn't miss him at all. Howard had a few run-ins with the police, one of them resulting in a mugshot that led to him being found. While he was gone, he married and moved to Wisconsin. But when he got divorced, he decided to move to Florida. Howard's brother had this to say, "I always had that inkling of hope he was alive. I would say, God, let me see my brother one more time." Moving on to the next case. Louis Massa. In December 2016, 64-year-old Louis Massa was found dead in front of his car on his driveway in Taro Road, Orange County, Florida. He had suffered blunt force trauma, with the cause of death being a blow to the head from a large lawn ornament. The circumstances surrounding his death remain unclear, and the case has yet to be solved. It is believed that someone attacked him in what may have been a targeted or opportunistic act of violence. But the identity of the perpetrator remains unknown. Some of his rings and phone had been stolen. There was also a broken window in his house. This made investigators believe had Louis interrupted the burglary. Neighbors told investigators had a man jumped the fence after triggering the house alarm just before police arrived on the scene. Witnesses helped investigators create the composite sketch. Investigators also found that another burglary took place less than a mile from Louis' home, a few days before his life was taken. Fingerprints were collected at crime scene. Recently, these fingerprints were tested to see if it matches anyone in a codes database. This led investigators to Devin Hill. When questioned, he admitted had he took Louis's life. He was arrested on January 29, 2021. He is currently being held in Orange County Jail, without bond. Moving on to the next case. David Glenn Lewis. David Glenn Lewis, born in 1953 in Borrego, Texas, was the youngest of 2 children. He graduated from high school in 1972 and went on to attend Texas Tech University, where he excelled academically. David earned a degree in political science before obtaining his doctorate in jurisprudence from Texas Tech University Law School in 1979. With his law degree, he became a member of the American Bar Association and began practicing law in Amarillo, Texas. During his time in law school, David married Karen, and the couple later had a daughter together in 1981. David's early career as a lawyer was promising, with his strong academic background and dedication to his profession shaping his future. From all outward appearances, David was a family man who never his paternal and civic duties. He volunteered for various charities, was a Sunday school teacher at the church he attended weekly, a member of the Dumas Community Education Advisory Council, and was involved in the Boy Scouts of America as a district chairman. In late January of 1993, in preparation for Super Bowl weekend that was about to occur, David's wife and daughter took a trip from their home in Amarillo, Texas to the metropolis of Dallas, a 365-mile journey for a girls' weekend of shopping. They departed Amarillo on the January 28th, leaving David at home alone. Little did they know this would be the last time they ever saw their beloved and cherished David, husband and father, alive. On the January 31st, which was the actual day of the Super Bowl trip and the day that Karen and her daughter returned home, they walked in to find the TV still recording the football game long after the match had ended, as well as fresh food in the fridge. David's wedding ring and his watch had been set on the kitchen counter, but David was nowhere to be seen. It has been discussed in the media that the TV recording machine David used, presumably a VHS, was not one that capable of recording on a preset function, meaning that he would still have to press record when wanting to start the tape recording of the game. Because the tape was still recording the subsequent television programming when his wife and child got home, the idea that his VCR was a manual one and not an automatic one is supported. The house was calm and quiet, with no signs of a struggle or anything missing or disturbed. Thinking David had left to watch the game from another household, or that he may have slipped out to do some errands, his wife and daughter initially thought nothing of his absence. However, by the morning of February 1st, with still no sign of David, his wife became increasingly worried. She then called Amarillo Police Department to report her husband missing. That night, unbeknownst to David's wife, a body would be found some 1,600 miles away. At 10:30 p.m. in Yakima County, Washington, several people spotted an individual on Route 24 near Moxie, several miles from Yakima Airport. That person was reported to be either walking in the middle of the road or lying by the side of the road, but was a hazard either way. So much so that the people in the car that witnessed this turned around on the road to head back the opposite way to warn incoming motorists of the danger to both themselves and the wayward man. But when the driver came back after warning the approaching motorists, he found the man already dead. The deceased man was middle-aged and dressed in military-style clothing and was wearing work boots. The man had been struck head-on by a vehicle who, understandably, didn't see him in the position he was on the road, but in a callous act of inhumanity fled the scene. A Chevrolet Camaro was seen speeding away around the time he was struck. Lacking any traces of the usual drugs tested for in his system and with no alcohol in his blood, police were flummoxed in regards to why this man was wandering on a dark road late at night. With no idea on his person, the police had no idea what had happened. Meanwhile, back in Amarillo, on the February 2nd, the investigation into David's disappearance takes a turn when his car is found. The red Ford Explorer was located outside of the Potter County Courthouse in downtown Amarillo. Under a mat on the floor, detectives found David's house key and car keys. His checkbook, credit cards, and driver's license were all located inside the car in David's normal storage areas. Back at home, detectives would continue to puzzle over the fact that David's wedding ring was set out at home, and that all of his normal items that David would usually bring along with him on any outing were accounted for. If they were at home, then where was David? Upon further interviews with David's wife, Karen, she revealed that he had cryptically told her that his life was in danger. He wouldn't, however, tell his wife any information about the threats he believed to be on his life or what the cause of the danger was. When the police looked into the days before David went missing, they found that on January 28th, David left his law firm, Buckner, Lara, and Swindle at around noon. He told his co-workers that he wasn't feeling well and was going home. Shortly after, his credit card was used to pay for gas. Even though he had stated that he wasn't feeling well, he taught a government class at Amarillo College until 10 p.m. that night. The next day, on January 29th, one of his friends claimed to have seen David hurrying through the Southwest Airlines terminal at Amarillo International Airport, and he wasn't carrying any luggage with him at the time. On that same night at around 10:30 p.m., a police officer claimed to have seen David's red Ford Explorer parked outside the Potter County Courts building. However, the vehicle was not there the next day. On January 30th, someone deposited $5,000 into David's joint bank account. A neighbor claimed to have seen the Ford Explorer at his house on that day. The next day, on January 31st, a sheriff's deputy saw the Ford Explorer parked outside the Potter County Courts building again, and a man resembling David was standing across the street from the courts building. The man seemed to be taking pictures of the vehicle. On the February 1st, a cab driver claimed to have driven someone who resembled David from a hotel to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. The driver said the man seemed very nervous and fumbled while paying in cash. David's family believes that his job as an attorney may have contributed to his untimely demise. They postulate that perhaps a past client that was unhappy with his work on their case, or maybe even a rival from David's professional life that he had made angry or jealous. Of course, David didn't win every case he tried as a lawyer, and perhaps a verdict that was unfavorable led to someone seeking out revenge. More specifically, David was meant to be in Dallas 1 week after his disappearance. He was set to give a deposition as witness to a conflict of interest case between himself, his former law firm, and one of their wealthy ex-clients. In a conversation he'd had with his father before his mysterious disappearance, David had said that he had no plans to help cover up any wrongdoings on the part of his former firm, and told his father that his plan was to, quote, tell the truth, whoever it hurts. While this idea of David being in danger was promising for investigators in terms of motive, those leads led to nowhere. One concrete piece of evidence detectives did find was puzzling. It was 2 plane tickets purchased in David's name around the time of his disappearance. The initial ticket they found was purchased on January 31st and had David scheduled to fly from Dallas to Amarillo. Detectives couldn't discern if this ticket was related to the same journey that David's wife and daughter had made on the exact same day, as they too went from Dallas to Amarillo. It's unclear how David's wife and daughter traveled, whether it was by plane, train, or automobile, but his wife stated that they didn't ever have plans for David to accompany them, as the main reason they were getting away was for him to enjoy the Super Bowl. The day this ticket was bought was the same day his wife and daughter returned home to an empty house. The second ticket was purchased 1 day later on February 1st and was a ticket from Los Angeles International Airport to Dallas. This is the same day that the body of a John Doe was discovered in Washington. It's unclear if any of the plane tickets had actually been used or had been attempted to be used. The true meaning or motivation behind these 2 tickets is unknown. If David did intend to use the plane tickets, how? How did he plan on getting from Amarillo to Dallas, which was roughly the distance of San Francisco to LA at almost 6 hours by car, so that he could then use the plane ticket which would take him from Dallas back to Amarillo? Detectives briefly wondered if David had some intention to meet up with his wife and daughters, some sort of surprise. But as his wife had asserted, no such plan was discussed. David's disappearance was closed after 7 months with no new developments. In 2002, the police department made a statement that they believed that, based on the fact that he had purchased plane tickets, that his leaving was voluntary and that no foul play was suspected, they believed that David voluntarily walked away from his life in Amarillo and disappeared into the night off the grid. 2003 marked 10 years since a John Doe was discovered wandering the road on the day after the Cowboys went against the Bills at the 1993 Super Bowl. Nearly a decade after David's disappearance, Washington Patrol Detective Pat Ditter was reading a newspaper series called Without a Trace, which was about missing persons cases that had gone cold. Ditter, a consummate detective, learned more about the main impediments to positive identification and closer and missing persons investigations. Particularly, Ditter read about the deep flaws of N6, the National Crime Information Center's computer system at that time. Motivated by the potentiality that the answers were already waiting, just ready to be cataloged, cross-referenced, and shared, Ditter decided to use what seems to have become the best friend to real-life detectives and armchair investigators alike, Google. Starting with the pretense that the information needed to find these missing persons had actually just fallen through the cracks of computer databases, Ditter utilized the power of Google by inputting characteristics of roughly a dozen unidentified bodies in the hope of finding missing persons cases that matched their physical descriptions. Only a week after Ditter first began to look up descriptions of unknown victims, a potential hit. The Yakima County, Washington, John Doe that had been found the night after the Super Bowl under more than unusual circumstances was linked through the keywords of his phenotypical descriptions to a man missing out of Dallas, Texas. All of this information was found under the Doe Network, a database created in hopes of bringing closure to families worldwide. On the website's search results and a display of various images of those who might be a potential match based on keywords, one caught Ditter's eye in particular. The picture of David Glenn Lewis of Amarillo, Texas was extraordinarily similar to the one Ditter had of the John Doe found in the dark road the night after the Super Bowl. The only difference from the picture of David in comparison to the one of the man found deceased was that the unnamed man found in the road was not wearing the usual eyeglasses David always wore. But sure enough, in looking at the catalog of contents found with the body, they had listed a pair of eyeglasses. Sure that there was more to this case than mere coincidence, Ditter contacted investigators in Amarillo and sent them a few items found on the John Doe from Washington that could be used to positively identify him. One of the items was the military-style work boots David was wearing. The other was a preserved tissue sample from the deceased. In October of 2004, using DNA provided by David's mother, Esther, they were able to match the two cases definitively. 11 years after his mysterious disappearance, family man and attorney David Glenn Lewis was positively identified as the deceased man found on Route 24, 1,600 miles from his home. Although the victim that had been killed in the hit and run would finally have a name, that seemed to be the only thing that was certain and straightforward about this case. It is unknown why David would have headed to Washington, and neither friends nor family have been able to offer any insight into a link that he may have had to the area. While the John Doe was finally given a real name, David Glenn Lewis, the realization brought about more questions than it did answers. Why was this established family man, set to have a calm weekend of football and leisure, found wandering the dark roads of a Washington highway? With no traces of alcohol and the normal talk screen coming up clean, what was an educated father doing on the side of a road? Had he made plans to meet someone in Washington? Had he been lured there by whomever he believed was trying to hurt him? And what was with the military-style clothing? David's wife and mother attested to the fact that David had no military ties, nor did he own, or have reason to own, any military clothing. His wife was sure that neither the clothes nor the shoes David was wearing were actually from his home. Ditter believes David's death on the road in Yakima County may have been an accident rather than a suicide. But even if that is true, why did he disappear to begin with? David Glenn Lewis was a man with a promising future, a devoted husband, father, and active member of his community. His disappearance in 1984 shocked everyone who knew him. Leaving his wedding ring on the counter at home, David seemingly vanished without a trace. His reappearance 1,600 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just days later was equally mysterious. He was found disoriented, unable to explain how he had gotten there or what had happened to him during his absence. Sadly, only days after being found, David met his untimely death in what many believed was a suspicious manner. While no clear answers have surfaced over the years, David's case remains surrounded by unanswered questions. His sudden disappearance, confused reappearance, and tragic end have left his family and community desperate for answers. Despite ongoing efforts, no new leads have been uncovered, but investigators continue to hope that someone, somewhere, might hold a piece of information that could finally provide closure to this chilling mystery. Moving on to the next case. Frederick Valentik. Over 40 years ago, a young pilot named Frederick Valentik, flying a Cessna 182L, was en route to King Island when he became part of one of the most intriguing mysteries in aviation history. After reporting to Steve Rouet on the flight service radio, Valentik's flight would end in an unexplained disappearance, placing him among the 20 known cases of pilots encountering the unknown. At just 20 years old, Frederick was an experienced member of the Air Training Corps and had held his private pilot's license for just over a year. He lived with his parents and by all accounts was a fine young man with no serious problems and was happily pursuing his career of choice. One day on October 18, 1978, he showed up at Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne to hire a plane in order to fly out to King Island, a round trip of some 560 kilometers, about 3.5 hours worth of flight time. He was turned away due to bad weather over the ocean. 3 days later, he returned to try again and this time got his plane, a single-engine Cessna. He took off at about 6:15 p.m. in the evening of October 21, 1978 for what would be his first and only night flight over water. The weather was good, visibility excellent, with scattered clouds and light winds. King Island is about halfway between the main island of Tasmania and mainland Australia. To fly there from Melbourne, you typically don't fly in a straight line because that would mean you're over water nearly the entire way. And flying over water is riskier than flying over land. So pilots typically go from Melbourne, southwest along the coast, to Cape Awe, which is the closest point on the mainland to King Island. This longer route is mostly over land. However, Even the safest route includes a stretch of 85 straight kilometers over water. Frederick's flight proceeded uneventfully. About 20 minutes after sunset, he turned away from the coast at an altitude of 4,500 feet and began a long stretch over water. At a little after 7 or 6 p.m., Frederick Valentik made a radio contact with the air traffic controllers in Melbourne to inquire if there were any other aircraft known to be flying in the area. The answer from Melbourne was no, an answer that was confirmed again during the odd communication that followed. Recordings of the actual radio conversation do exist, but for some reason, I couldn't find the real recordings. However, the transcript of the conversation is still available, and based on that there have been several reenactments. His final transmission was at 7:12 p.m. Some sources claim that the exchange went on after this and that Valentik said his Cessna was engulfed in a green light and he was burning. However, I couldn't find any proof to this. At the end of the transmission, there's a loud noise like metal scraping on metal. Although in intensive air, land and sea search was carried out until October 25th, no trace of Cessna or Frederick was found. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation released its findings in May 1982 stating that the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined, but the outcome was presumed fatal. Interestingly, there appears to have been UFO and strange light sightings in the Kings Island and Bay Street area on the night that Frederick Valentik disappeared. There also may have been sightings both in the weeks before and after the event. The number of UFO sightings in the area range anywhere between 1150. At this point, the information has become so convoluted that it would be nearly impossible to come up with a definite number of sightings. To understand what happened, we need to look more closely at Frederick Valentik himself. Frederick Valentik was a 20-year-old inexperienced flyer with only about 150 total hours of flying time and a Class 4 instrument rating, which meant he could operate at night but only in visual meteorological conditions. He had twice been rejected by the Royal Australian Air Force due to inadequate education. Having obtained a private pilot's license in September 1977, he was studying part-time for a commercial pilot's license. Unfortunately, he had failed all 5 of his exam subjects not once but twice, and just a month before again failed 3 subjects. Further, his involvement in 3 flying incidents came to the attention of officials. Once he received a warning for having strayed into restricted airspace, and twice he was cited for deliberately flying blindly into a cloud, for which he was under threat of prosecution. In brief, Valentik may have been an accident waiting to happen. Moreover, the young pilot was enthralled with UFOs, watching films and accumulating articles on the topic. Earlier that year, according to his father, Valentik had himself observed a UFO moving away very fast, and he had expressed to his father his worry about what would happen if such presumed extraterrestrial craft should ever attack. Several theories have been set forth regarding the disappearance of Frederick Valentik. All of them are rooted in some truth, though all are speculations as we cannot verify what happened to Valentik that night. One theory is that Valentik committed suicide but wanted to go out with a bang. There is nothing to suggest this. Frederick was a well-adjusted young man. He had a girlfriend. There was no problem there. He wasn't suffering from depression and he got well with the family. There is absolutely no reason to believe that Frederick Valentik wanted to die. Another theory is that he was either killed or taken by aliens. There is no way to prove or disprove that suggestion. Another is that Frederick's engine troubles came from interference from the unidentified flying object. Again, this is yet another theory that cannot be proven, but it is supported by the fact that Valentik reported engine trouble during his encounter with it. However, this is hardly evidence of the truth of the theory. And lastly, there's this theory that Frederick was playing an elaborate practical joke, yet his father later said that Valentik would have taken such a thing very seriously. But upon my research, I found a few things that made me look further into this theory. First is that Frederick lied to everyone about why he was going to the King Island. He told flight officials that he was picking up passengers, but there were no passengers there to be picked up. He told his family and girlfriend that he was going to pick up crayfish, but there were no crayfish available on the island. He'd even told his girlfriend he'd be back by 7:30 p.m., which was clearly impossible. Neither story was true. And secondly, Valentik had not even followed standard procedure to inform King Island Airport of his intent to land there. Frederick knew he would arrive well after the dark, and he knew that the airstrip on King Island was uncontrolled, meaning it had no control tower and nobody on the radio. He would have had to call in advance to have the runaway lights turned on, and he should have known this, but he never made such a call. So what was Valentik really up to? Closed Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released in 1977, 1 year before Frederick's disappearance. The movie was a favorite among UFO fans and ignited an intense community interest in UFOs and the potential of extraterrestrial life. Frederick seemed to have emulated every major element in that movie scene. Does that mean he was trying to replicate the famous movie scene and in the process possibly starving his carburetors and crashing into ocean? Given his fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrials, it's a likely possibility. But there is absolutely no way to know that for sure, as these are just theories and speculations. Friedrich Valentik may very well have encountered a UFO. While it's impossible to definitively link the unidentified flying object to Friedrich Valentik's disappearance, the most plausible explanation is that he experienced engine failure and crashed into the ocean. His plane, along with possibly his remains, may still be lost beneath the waves to this day. Linda Slayton. Linda Slayton, a 31-year-old mother of two, was discovered dead in her Lakeland, Florida home on the morning of September 4, 1981. Her sister, Judy Butler, arrived at Linda's home to meet for coffee. But upon entering, Judy found Linda's lifeless body lying on the bed with a wire hanger wrapped around her neck. Judy immediately called 911. The discovery sparked an investigation into Linda's death, which was initially ruled as a homicide. Despite the clear signs of foul play, the circumstances surrounding Linda's death remained unclear, leading to an ongoing investigation. Linda Slayton's tragic death shocked her family and the community. After investigators arrived at the scene and determined that she had been assaulted and strangled, they had the difficult task of informing her two sons. They found 15-year-old Jeff sleeping in the living room and gently instructed him to put on some clothes and go outside. When he stepped outside, Jeff was confronted with an overwhelming scene. Numerous police officers, news crews, and his distraught aunt, Judy, crying. It was in that moment that Judy, with great sorrow, told Jeff that his mother had been murdered. The emotional impact on Jeff and his family was immense, and the investigation into Linda's death continued, searching for answers. In the second bedroom, an officer gently woke up 12-year-old Tim, Linda's younger son. Still in his pajamas, Tim walked past his mother's closed bedroom door, unaware of the tragic scene behind it. As he passed, the door unexpectedly swung open as an officer exited, and Tim was confronted with the sight of the crime scene. It was an overwhelming and traumatic moment for the young boy. Investigators quickly deduced that the perpetrator had likely entered Linda's bedroom through the window, as the screen had been removed, indicating a forced entry. The investigation continued as they sought clues to identify who was responsible for the senseless murder. Investigators began to focus their attention on Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton, as a possible lead. The two had divorced in 1974 when Linda was just 24 years old. Given the sensitive nature of the case, they examined their past relationship, wondering if Frank had any connection to the murder. While the divorce had been amicable on the surface, the investigators dug deeper into the history between the couple. They discovered that Frank had maintained some level of involvement in Linda's life after the divorce, but there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime scene. Meanwhile, the palm print found on the windowsill and the DNA from the unknown man remained the focus of the investigation, providing new leads to pursue in the search for Linda's killer. He was a violent alcoholic and would turn abusive and hit Linda. Even though he was an asshole, investigators could not link him to the crime. Another person investigators looked at was Jeff Slayton. They interviewed him a few times, but could not prove that he was responsible either. Investigators also looked into Joe Mills. 20-year-old Mills was Tim's football coach at school. After getting divorced, Linda struggled for work, made her own clothes to save money, and could not afford a car. Mills then drove Tim to and from practice every day. Investigators could not link Mills to the crime scene either. Sergeant Edgar Pickett worked at the Lakeland Police Department as a fingerprint expert. He scoured the entire crime scene and was the one that found the palm print on the windowsill. The palm print and the DNA taken from Linda's body was stored, so it could be used at a later date. Jeff and Tim moved in with their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris. They were terrified and almost never left the house. They all slept in the same room except Grandpa Harris. He would stand guard with a gun all night while they slept. The grandparents hoped a quick return to familiar routines would help their distraught grandsons. A few weeks after their mom's funeral, the boys were back in school. They decided to focus on football. This is a photo of Tim's football team, taken a month after Linda's life was taken. Tim hung the photo in his bedroom. He said it reminded him of something his mom taught him, to keep moving forward and never giving up. In recent years, Jeff and Tim stated that there is still grief and guilt for not hearing anything that night, for not coming to their mom's rescue. In March of 1999, investigators had developed a full DNA profile of the person that took Linda's life. All they needed was a match. Detective Brad Grice took over the case in February 2001. He took dozens of DNA samples from prior persons of interest, submitting them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for comparison. Detective Grice then met with Jeff and Tim. He took DNA samples from the brothers to clear them again. He also promised them that he would not retire until he solved their mother's case. Frank Slayton, who had stopped drinking, also volunteered a sample, but none matched. Then, in September 2001, Detective Grice got a tip. Nearly a year after Linda's life was taken, a 24-year-old man named Jimmy Ulmer pulled a 10-year-old girl through her bedroom window and it nearly took her life. Ulmer was convicted of that and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The savage assault seemed eerily similar to Linda's case. Furthermore, Detective Grice discovered that around the time Linda's life was ended, Jimmy Ulmer had been staying with a friend who happened to live in the very same apartment complex as Linda. Detective Grice, along with Jeff and Tim, felt confident that they had their man. Ulmer passed away in prison in 1996, but Grice got a DNA sample from his mother. When his DNA did not match the DNA from the crime scene, it was a massive disappointment. Felt like they were back to square one. By February 2005, Detective Grice was headed up to a new cold case unit and got the FBI to run the DNA profile continuously through all federal databanks. But the years continued to pass without a match. In February 2015, Detective Grice had medical problems which forced him to retire, meaning he unfortunately couldn't keep his promise. All hope was not lost, however, as in February 2018, groundbreaking DNA technology began to electrify the law enforcement community. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore decided to take on Linda's case. She is a renowned expert in the field of investigative genetic genealogy. Cece has been responsible for solving so many cold cases, many of which have been covered on this channel. Moore uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy website called GeneMatch. She then meticulously constructed, branch by branch, the culprit's family tree. She made these connections by poring over birth certificates, marriage license, obituaries, and social media to fill in the family tree with names. Moore explained that she uncovered 3 branches of the perpetrator's family tree that ultimately narrowed to the one person most likely responsible. She said that the 3 genetic networks converged into one family tree that pointed at one immediate family. The man was the only son in that family, so it had to be him that was the DNA contributor. After hundreds of leads and dead ends, after dozens of suspects were investigated and cleared, Moore identified the man in one weekend. The man is Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe, who drove Tim to and from practice. Authorities wanted to be C. Moore's final 2019 report confirmed that Joseph Mills, then 58, was living in Kathleen, Florida, about a half an hour from the crime scene. Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley were the next generation of Lakeland investigators who worked on Linda's case. The detectives then combed over the happened to Linda. Detectives found that Mills was convicted in 1984 of grand theft for forging a will. He never went to jail, but he was fingerprinted and had a palm print taken as well. In August of 2019, investigators compared those prints to the palm prints Sergeant Pickett lifted off Linda's windowsill nearly 38 years before. It was a match. High-tech genetic genealogy had identified Mills as the likely culprit, and an old-fashioned palm print helped confirm his identity. Detectives Hathcock and Hurley still needed to compare a fresh DNA sample from Mills to the decades-old DNA recovered from the crime scene. They covertly took Mills' trash back to the police department. They discovered a piece of used medical adhesive tape and sent it off to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab for testing. 11 days later, the tests came back and it was confirmed that Joseph Mills took the life of Linda Slayton. Only then could her sons Jeff and Tim be informed that the monster had finally been caught. Tim said he had looked up to Coach Joe and was now sickened that he had this photo of him all these years. Even more sickening was that Mills continued driving Tim to and from practice after he took Linda's life. On December 12, 2019, detectives arrested Joseph Mills. Here is a picture of Detective Tammy Hathcock reading him his rights. He showed no emotion and didn't ask why he was being arrested, almost as if he already knew. After the arrest, Tim and Jeff went to meet Sergeant Edgar Pickett, now 94 years old, to personally thank him for collecting the palm print all those years back. In 2022, Mills pleaded guilty to all charges. At his sentencing, Linda's family wanted to know why. Jeff yelled at him in court, "Why? I just want to know why, Joe. Why'd you take my mama from me? I loved my mama. We was happy." Mills' response infuriated everyone. "I am a good person. I'm not that person that they're painting me out to be." Finally, in February of 2022, Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cece Moore said, "We owe a huge debt of gratitude to those original crime scene investigators. Because at the time this crime was committed, they didn't even know DNA was going to be used in criminal investigations. And so the fact they collected that, and then it was stored responsibly and carefully all these years by that department is so important. If that hadn't happened, we couldn't have done our work." Jeff and Tim say they're determined to move on the best they can, to live life well for their mom and for their families. The brothers also know they never would have survived their ordeal without each other. It's clear that Jeff and Tim have maintained a deep bond and connection to their mother despite the tragic circumstances surrounding her death. If you need more information or further details about the case, feel free to ask. Moving on to the next case. Angelique Emily James. According to family members, 4-year-old Angelique Emily James was last seen at her family's home in Los Angeles on February 15, 1997. Details surrounding the exact time and circumstances of her disappearance remain unclear. Once her absence was noted, investigators questioned her mother, Shirley, and James, who could not provide any evidence regarding her daughter's whereabouts and was uncooperative with authorities. In November, 9 months after the disappearance, Shirley was taken into custody after being ordered to present Angelique, but failed to do so. The situation grew increasingly dire as Angelique's 3 sisters had already been placed in the care of Child Protective Services, CPS, following allegations of abuse. Shirley had 4 other children in total, including a 9-month-old daughter who tragically died in 1992, allegedly from sudden infant death syndrome. Shortly after her arrest, Shirley was charged with the presumed murder of Angelique, as well as 3 counts of child abuse and 2 counts of corporal injury to a child. The death of her 9-month-old daughter was looked into by homicide detectives, but no charges were filed. Investigators believe Angelique died between December 15, 1996 and March 1, 1997. In late 1997, authorities searched the garden of the family's home hoping to find the remains of Angelique. And while a cadaver dog initially found a scent in the area, no evidence was discovered. Shirley pleaded not guilty to all charges laid against her in January of 1998, but later pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter in Angelique's case. Under this plea agreement, she was given a maximum sentence of 5 years. Angelique remains missing. Her body has never been found. She was 4 when she vanished from her family's LA home, and though the date of her disappearance is listed as February 15, 1997, she may have gone missing as early as December 15, 1996. Angelique is described as a black female with black hair and brown eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 3'6" and weighed around 8 pounds 40. She has burn scars on the top of one foot and a previous fracture on her left arm which is visible by an X-ray. Due to a congenital skeletal abnormality, she has one leg and one arm shorter than the other. Angelique is presumed dead. But if she is still alive, she will be 31 years old in October. If you have any information about her case, you can contact the LA County Sheriff's Department at 323-890-5500. Gabriel Nagy. Gabriel Nagy, a dedicated father and respected member of his family, led a fulfilling life in Sydney, Australia, with his wife Pamela and their children Stephen and Jennifer. Immigrating to Australia as a young boy, he had a strong connection to his family and his community. Gabriel worked as a shop fitter, assisting businesses in constructing retail spaces around the city. Despite his content and stable life, something began to tear his family apart, leading to an unforeseen and tragic outcome. Gabriel had aspirations of becoming an accountant and was taking courses to reach that goal. On January 21, 1987, he went into the city to take care of some errands and called his wife, Pamela, to let her know he would be home for lunch. Pamela prepared a meal for him and waited, but Gabriel never arrived. She waited anxiously until she received a phone call that would alter her life forever in Sydney. Surely, someone had to know what happened to Gabriel after the car accident. Unfortunately, no one knew. 2 weeks after Gabriel disappeared, the police determined that he withdrew money from a bank in the city of Newcastle. Newcastle is about 100 miles away from Sydney. His family was hopeful about the new lead and believed this would help them find Gabriel. The lead turned into a dead end, however, and the case went cold for 2 more decades. There was a senior constable by the name of Georgia Robinson. She promised herself that she would solve this case. In her last attempt at finding Gabriel, she did just that in February 2012. She looked through some files when she came across something interesting. The Medicare system in Australia showed documents that a person named Gabriel Nagy recently underwent eye surgery. The records also showed that the man went by another name, Ron Saunders. Constable Robinson called this man. He told her that the last 2 decades of his life was fuzzy to say the least. He spent most of his time homeless, just wandering from city to city. That was until a pastor by the name of Barry Hale came across Gabriel. The pastor gave Gabriel a job at the church as a caretaker. Gabriel got the name Ron Saunders from a sign for the Queensland Saunders Beach while he was wandering around. His memories slowly came back, so when he got the eye surgery, he gave the name of Gabriel Nagy as well. Robinson flew to where Gabriel was currently living and showed him pictures of his family. More and more of his memory started to come back. The car accident Gabriel was in left him with a serious head injury. He then fell into a fugue state, which led him to forget everything about his life. Gabriel described the situation as unreal. He still didn't fully remember his family. He vowed to keep in touch, but he couldn't bring himself to move back in with his family. This is a photograph of Pamela and their daughter, Jennifer. With the photo album they showed Gabriel, and here is a picture of Gabriel and Jennifer when they first saw each other again in February 2012. Moving on to the next case. Jill Dando. During the latter half of the 1990s, Jill Dando, an English television presenter and journalist, was one of the BBC's most recognizable personalities. She hosted several TV shows, including Crime Watch, a documentary series that recreated dramatic reconstructions of unsolved murders. Ironically, Dando would herself become the victim of an unsolved murder, and would later be featured on the very show she once narrated. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando left her fiancé's home. Traveling by car, she went shopping and then to her own house in Fulham. She approached the front door and she was shot dead. Her body was discovered around 14 minutes later by a neighbor. Jill was rushed to the hospital, but she was declared dead on arrival. Forensic investigations found she had been shot by a 9mm caliber automatic pistol with the gun pressed against her head at the moment she was shot. Pressing the gun against her head would have silenced the fatal shot and prevented her killer from being splattered with blood. Police struggled to find any evidence leading to her killer, though they believed her murder was the work of a deranged fan. Eventually, Their attention focused on Barry George, a local man who was obsessed with celebrities, guns, and women. George was a lonely stalker with a collection of 4,000 photographs he had taken of women he had seen on the streets. He claimed that he was the cousin of Freddie Mercury and allegedly held a grudge against the BBC because he believed they covered his cousin too negatively. Despite his insistence that he was innocent, George was convicted of Dando's murder in 2001 based on flimsy evidence about a speck of gunpowder residue found inside his pocket. But on August 1, 2008, after a second appeal, George was exonerated and released from prison. The residue in his pocket, the court reasoned, might have come from somewhere else. Furthermore, the murder weapon had never been recovered, and George had been ruled intellectually incapable of being able to carry out the crime. To date, the crime still hasn't been solved. It led to widespread speculation. One theory was that Dando was targeted as part of a revenge crime for a story she had investigated herself on Crime Watch. Others believed she'd been the victim of a professional assassin, hired by someone who wanted her dead. Another suggested she'd been killed by the Serbian mafia. This was the time of the Kosovo War, and Dando had presented a charity appeal on behalf of the Kosovo refugees. She later received a letter from a Serbian source condemning this action. Also, the NATO bombings of the Serbian TV headquarters had taken place 3 days prior to Dando's death. It was theorized that she may have been killed by Serbian extremists in retaliation for the charity appeal, or even for the bombing. The case remains open and unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Crystal and Timek. 6-year-old Crystal and Timek was last seen on June 30, 1994, between 2 and 5 p.m. According to her brother, Jeffrey, the siblings had been tossing peaches over the roof of a house, competing to see who could throw them the farthest. Afterward, they ran back to their father's home on the 6,000 block of Brynhist Avenue after hearing their grandmother call for them. However, when the 3 boys looked back, they realized Crystal was no longer with them. Crystal has never been seen or heard from again. More than 100 officers from the LAPD conducted an extensive search of the surrounding neighborhood, but no trace of her was ever found. According to Crystal's mother, Jane Newman, several neighbors of the children's father, Mario Timek, had reported seeing Crystal wander away from the property on multiple occasions. Each time, a neighbor would return her to her father's home. Jane also mentioned that her daughter had talked about running away, adding another layer of concern to the mystery surrounding Crystal's disappearance. Few developments came in Crystal's case in the subsequent years. In late 1995, there were reports that the 6-year-old was seen near the Corvallis County Public Library. And in early 1996, detectives in Corvallis, Oregon asked for information from the public, but the lead appears to have gone nowhere. The following year, the owner of Wigginton's Plumbing Services put the pictures of several missing children on their trucks in the hopes of raising awareness of the cases and bringing answers, though none ever appeared in Crystal's case. In February 2005, a home across the road from Crystal's was searched by over 100 members of law enforcement. They found bones in the property's crawl space, but these were soon discovered to belong to animals. According to one of Crystal's brothers, Jeffrey, a woman reverend had resided in the home in 1994 and often invited local children inside where she would conduct religious services. She didn't live in this property in 2005, and it's unclear what prompted investigators to search the building. Sadly, there have been no updates in Crystal's case since February 2005. Her brothers, who were aged 12, 10, and 8 respectively at the time of her disappearance, are still searching for answers. Her father still resides in the same house on Brynhist Avenue. Crystal and Timek was just 6 when she vanished from the 61,000 block of Brynhist Avenue on June 30, 1994. She's described as a white female with dark blonde hair and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 4 feet tall and weighed around 8 pounds 60. She was last seen wearing a pink t-shirt, floral print shorts, and trainers featuring an image of a mermaid. If you have any information about Crystal's disappearance, you can contact the LAPD at 213-485-4175. Moving on to the next case. Julie and Williams. Julie Williams, 24, and Laura Winans, 26, embarked on a camping trip along the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia, in May of 1996. The couple, who had met nearly 2 years earlier at With Woman, a nonprofit focused on adventure travel for women, shared a deep love for the outdoors. Along with Laura's golden retriever, Taj, the pair set out on May 19, 1996, looking forward to their time in nature. Tragically, their trip would end in a mysterious and unsolved double homicide that left their loved ones and authorities searching for answers. However, they never arrived back home. Nearly 2 weeks later, on May 31, 1996, Thomas Williams, Julie's father, reported his daughter missing after neither of the women's families had heard from them. Park rangers immediately launched the search of the area for the missing couple, and soon they located Julie and Laura's car just north of Skyland Lodge. During the search, Laura's golden retriever, Taj, was found wandering around seemingly unharmed. The next day, rangers came upon a campsite and discovered Julie and Laura's bodies. Laura was found in her tent, gagged with her hands bound with duct tape. Her legs were tied with a pair of thermal underwear. Although partially undressed, there were no outward signs of sexual assault. Subsequent forensic analysis showed that the duct tape gag had previously been used to bind Julie's hands. Julie was found 75 feet from their tent in her sleeping bag. She was naked, gagged, and had her hands bound with duct tape. Investigators noted that unlike Laura, her legs were not tied. While there was no outward evidence of sexual assault, it was suggested that the May 2nd have been tortured, though no specific details were released. Both women died from having their throats slashed with a sharp knife. Determining the time of death was challenging, but the coroner estimated that the deaths occurred between May 26th, May 28th, although some indications suggest that the deaths may have happened the night of May 24th. Photos left behind in the couple's camera offer a glimpse into the final days of Julie and Laura's lives. The women arrived in Shenandoah National Park on May 19, 1996, setting off into the woods of the White Oak Canyon Trail only to return a few days later due to rain. They then hitched a ride with the park ranger and renewed their camping permit before venturing out again. They climbed Hawksville, the highest mountain in Shenandoah, and made their camp that night in a picturesque spot next to a stream near the Appalachian Trail. Surrounded by the peacefulness of nature, it would be shortly after they set up camp that Julie and Laura's lives would come to a vicious and violent end. Given the women's sexual orientation and the brutal and calculated nature of the murders, authorities wondered if they were victims of a hate crime. An incarcerated man named David Durrell Rice became a suspect in the case. He was known for expressing his hatred toward women and the LGBT community specifically. He was later arrested after an attempted abduction of a female bicyclist in Shenandoah National Park. He would eventually serve a 10-year sentence for the abduction attempt. Investigators continued to look into possible connections between him and the double homicide, and in April of 2002, Rice was indicted on capital murder charges in the Shenandoah National Park killings. In the statement of facts, authorities claimed that he targeted Julie and Laura out of a hatred for women and for the homosexual community. However, 2 years later, the charges against Rice were dropped once it was determined that DNA and hair samples from the crime scene did not match to Rice. Additional testing revealed that the hair found was visually similar under a microscope to that of known serial killer Richard M. Evenitz. In June of 2002, Evenitz was about to be arrested for an unrelated crime, but he ended up killing himself as police closed in. Forensic evidence eventually linked Evenitz to the unsolved murders of 3 teenage girls, all killed in the mid-90s. As these crimes also occurred in Virginia around the same time that Julie and Laura were murdered, Evenitz was considered a suspect, but nothing else connected him to the crime directly. For the next 25 years, the case remained cold, but in 2021, a new FBI Richmond investigative team was assigned to review the case. The task force re-examined previous leads and interviews as well as evidence recovered from the site of the killings. The team sent the evidence collected from the crime scene and had it retested by an accredited private lab. The private lab collected DNA from, quote, several items of evidence, and with the help of Virginia State Police, The DNA profile was sent to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODES. Finally, in June of 2024, the DNA was positively matched to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist from Cleveland. Jackson, who had painted homes for a living, died in an Ohio prison in March of 2018. He had an extensive criminal history, including convictions for kidnapping and assault. At the time of the killings, Jackson, who officials said was an avid hiker, was believed to have been driving a 1984 chestnut brown AMC Eagle 30, and later drove a Ford van. At a press conference, the FBI revealed details about the vehicles associated with the suspect, Jackson, and released photos of him, seeking the public's assistance in determining whether he may have had additional victims. Despite ongoing investigations into possible further crimes, after 28 years, the murders of Julie Williams and Laura Winans are now officially considered a closed case. The tragic killings remain a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking even in the most serene of locations. And though justice has been served for these two women, questions surrounding other potential victims linger. Jennifer Doherty on February 11, 2010. A truck driver traveling through Greensburg, Pennsylvania, noticed something odd on the otherwise quiet streets. As he passed the Greensburg-Salem Middle School, his attention was drawn to a tipped-over trash can. Though it would have been simpler to ignore it, his curiosity got the better of him. When he investigated, he discovered a gruesome sight. Inside the trash can lay the badly mangled and bloody corpse of a woman. While he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing, he immediately dialed 911, and the police rushed to the scene to inspect the remains of what seemed like a nightmarish act. On their arrival, the cops saw the body haphazardly stuffed into the dumpster with several knife stab wounds. Besides, they shockingly discovered that the woman had several bruises on her, indicating she was badly beaten by her attacker before they had killed her. The corpse also looked mysteriously out of place in a dumpster outside a middle school, suggesting that it was not the site of the murder, but the site of disposal. While searching the battered body of the woman, the police found a note in the back pocket of her pants. The condition of the body completely betrayed the contents of the note, and the only shred of truth it carried was the name of the unfortunate victim, Jennifer. What really happened to this woman? How horrifying were her final moments before she ended up getting killed in such a terrible manner? A little more scrutiny enabled the cops to track down the parents of the now-deceased Jennifer Daughtry, who were then called in to identify her body. The parents, Richard and Denise Daughtry, were shocked out of their wits on seeing that their sweet daughter was taken away from them in such a vicious manner. They informed the police that Jennifer was 30 years old. However, her intellectual and psychological challenges had limited her mental age to that of a 12 to 14-year-old girl. Born on November 8, 1979 in Latrobe of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, Jennifer was a bright soul who had a very warm and welcoming vibe. While she got bullied by several kids in her school days because of her mental challenges, her personality allowed her to befriend several likable companions. On that fateful day, while talking to Jennifer's parents, the cops surprisingly came to learn that she was a resident of Mount Pleasant. This made them question what she was doing in Greensburg, and who really took her life. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. The Daughtries told the police that their girl regularly visited Greensburg for her medical appointments. She was also taking life skill lessons at the West Place Clubhouse in Greensburg, which also involved getting trained to become a mechanic. This time, however, she had arrived in the city to meet a new group of friends for a sleepover. Jennifer had met this group of 6 people via Angela Marinacci, whom she bumped into while taking her lessons at the West Place Clubhouse. Both girls hit it off very well, and Angela introduced Jennifer to her friends: Ricky Smyrns, Melvin Knight, Amber Menninger, Robert Masters, and Peggy Miller. While Jennifer had been battling with mental challenges, surprisingly, she wasn't alone anymore. Everyone in the new gang of friends had their own cognitive challenges, and so they stuck close to each other. Many of them had developed these issues because of bad childhoods trampled with negative experiences. Such relatable issues helped Jennifer to quickly bond with the group and be happy in the company of others like her, who were also trying to live despite their psychological struggles. Jennifer's parents showed complete trust in this new group of friends, since they had observed that their daughter was very happy with them. Before going out on February 10, 2010, Jennifer had left a note for her mother saying that she would be back home after the sleepover by the next day afternoon. In fact, she even mentioned the contact details of all 6 friends to reach out to in case of any unforeseen emergencies. Sadly, these words turned out to be her last bits of communication with her parents and the first lead in the investigation of her murder. According to the douchery, something must have happened after the time Jennifer got off the bus, so as to reach the house where the fun getaway was planned. The police decided to meet this group in good faith and ask if they knew anything about this gruesome murder. But little did they know that they would discover something completely sinister and unbelievable. From the outside, the house where Jennifer was supposed to meet her friends seemed rather dull and ordinary. It still had some lights on its exterior, suggesting that the Christmas decorations hadn't been taken off. But when the cops walked in through the door, they discovered that the house, which adorned a semi-festive look, was plagued with the stench of gore and blood. The house occupied by Jennifer's friends turned out to be the crime scene where she was badly beaten and killed, with almost every corner of the house reeking of the grim nature of the incident. The cops apprehended all 6 in the group, who didn't try very hard to deny what had happened in the face of all the glaring evidence in the house. While just a glimpse of Jennifer's body screamed torture, the evidence found in the house of the Greensburg 6 confirmed that she was badly humiliated before being killed. In the house, the police found all the objects that were used to hurt the helpless Jennifer along with the murder weapon, which was a kitchen knife that eventually ended her final breath. The cops relentlessly questioned everyone and asked them what happened during the night of the sleepover on February 10, 2010. The statements from the Greenberg 6 revealed that the sleepover was just a trap for Jennifer, and that her punishment was pre-planned instead of being something accidental. They also learned that the mastermind behind this heinous crime was none other than the youngest of them all, Angela Marinucci, who was also Jennifer's close friend. Just when Jennifer crossed their doorstep, the group put their plans into action, and they suddenly began hitting her. Jennifer was quite confused at the time since this wasn't the welcome she was expecting. Why did this new group of friends she had trusted so much suddenly turn hostile? What sick intentions might have motivated these 6 people to mercilessly hurt a mentally challenged friend and eventually take her life? Jennifer's phone and purse were immediately confiscated by the group, who began their grueling torture session that would go on for 36 long hours. They tore her purse and poured several fluids into it. Angela and Amber initiated the physical assault and beat Jennifer up with several objects. They took turns as they bruised her with several items, including a sturdy pair of crutches, a vacuum cleaner hose, a towel bar, and a 2-liter lemonade bottle. The duo was later joined by the others who kicked Jennifer repeatedly, crushing her belly and her chest. The badly bruised Jennifer was also forced to gulp down several undrinkable fluids, like cooking oil, nail polish, detergent, urine, and even made-to-eat fleas. All of these were poured onto her head, followed by oatmeal and spices. Jennifer retaliated against the assaults as she tried to throw her limbs around to attack her assailants. Unfortunately, Jennifer ended up choosing the wrong target by hitting Amber hard in the stomach. The group said that Amber was pregnant and escalated their assault on Jennifer after tying her with Christmas lights and decorations to prevent her from standing up to them again. The group shaved Jennifer's head and smeared her face with nail polish while continuing to thrash her. Unable to fight, Jennifer tried begging her attackers for mercy. The group either stopped nor explained while she became the victim of their sadism. Instead, Melvin Knight took off Jennifer's clothes and forced himself on the heavily bruised victim while everyone else watched. After Melvin was done, they forced Jennifer into the bathroom to have a shower, citing the trouble they were having with her stench. While Jennifer thought that her captors were done with her, you would discover next that she couldn't have been more wrong. The thrashing instantly resumed, and Jennifer's mini-illusion was instantly shattered. But things did come to a stop afterwards since the Greensburg 6 got bored of constantly beating Jennifer to a pulp. The group then decided to vote to either let Jennifer go on the expectation that she would remain quiet or to kill her and get rid of her body. Jennifer begged her supposed friends to set her free. But the next morning, February 11th, she learned that all 6 had unanimously voted to end her life. Before killing her, the group somehow thought that making Jennifer write a note would shield them whenever her body was found. For reasons unknown, the group made Jennifer take several antibiotics, painkillers, and sleeping pills before Ricky Smerms asked Melvin to stab her in the chest. This could either be due to an unexpected return of their conscience, or an attempt to prolong Jennifer's suffering using medicines. The latter stands more probable since they didn't spare the life of the already tortured Jennifer. Thus, any consideration of the Greensburg Six's empathy towards their unfortunate victim was completely out of the question. Instead, Melvin plunged a knife into Jennifer's body thrice, striking her chest and her throat. He later checked on her to find that she was still alive and slashed her wrist to end Jennifer's life. The group didn't immediately dispose of Jennifer's body. Angela Marinucci asked the group to prop the dead body up and wrap it in Christmas lighting to get a dazzling display of their monstrosity. But when the damaged Christmas lights didn't work, the frustrated group stuffed her body in a trash can where it was eventually found. All of this clearly showcased that none of the 6 had any form of remorse over their actions. But what really made them carry out this torture come murder? After learning of such a horrifying account, cops cracked down hard on everyone to find out why they made Jennifer suffer so much. The Greensburg 6 revealed that Jennifer had developed a crush on Ricky, who was Angela's boyfriend at the time. Moreover, Angela once caught Ricky secretly speaking with Jennifer over the phone. This made her furious with jealousy, following which she decided to punish her new friend for crossing the line and hatched a plan with Amber. Cops found that this flow of romance wasn't one way, as Ricky later revealed that he loved Jennifer as well. Both had confessed their love to each other and had also been intimate on a few occasions behind Angela's back. This really made the detectives think as to why Ricky participated or even approved of whatever happened with Jennifer. Especially, he could have avoided everything by simply warning Jennifer and asking her not to come for the sleepover. The confession from the other members of the Greensburg 6, especially Peggy Miller and Robert Masters, revealed that Angela was a very dangerous woman and they were very afraid of her. Peggy and Robert also said they didn't participate in any of the violence and were willing to cooperate with the police and get a plea deal in court. However, the fear analogy didn't stand true for everyone, especially Melvin Knight, who seemed to have enjoyed torturing and assaulting Jennifer the most. Nevertheless, when things came down to the point for each member to vote, none of them voted to let Jennifer live despite already having made her go through a hellish nightmare. However, the police now had what they needed to get justice for Jennifer Dashry. The hearing for the case began on November 3, 2010, revealing that Angela, Ricky, and Jennifer had a very complex love triangle, with Ricky being at the center of it all. Angela had actually overheard Ricky speaking with Jennifer when she had heard him saying that he loved her and wanted to marry her. This made Angela fume with rage since she had been his girlfriend for several years. The state of Pennsylvania had never seen a heinous and violent crime of this degree. On August 3, 2011, when giving the verdict, the court found the charges against Angela serious enough for death penalty. But since she was only 17 at the time of the incident, she ended up receiving life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Due to certain unrelated developments, her sentence saw some revisions, with the final order coming in May 2022. Angela is now undergoing her sentence and would be eligible for parole only in 2017. Ricky Smerns and Melvin Knight, however, received the death penalty on February 28, 2013 and April 12, 2012 respectively. Knight later challenged his sentence in September 2014, stating that the jury was prejudiced towards him, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania upheld his sentence twice. Speaking about her judgment on Knight, Pennsylvania Supreme Court's Chief Justice Deborah Todd said that the jury was not biased in its judgment to give the death penalty to Melvin Knight. She instead noted that the decision was made after a thorough examination of a large pool of evidence, which proved Knight and the rest of the Greensburg 6 having subjected Jennifer, a mentally challenged woman, to several forms of assault and torture, eventually killing her. Amber Menninger pled guilty to third-degree murder, conspiracy, and kidnapping, though she had initially tried to get some relief citing her pregnancy. Once she found out she could be facing the death penalty, She chose to cooperate as a witness and received a sentence of 40 to 80 years in prison on December 4th. Prior to the trial, Peggy Miller and Robert Masters had already agreed to testify as witnesses. During the trial, Robert revealed that he had almost helped Jennifer in escaping and also returned her clothes while Melvin and Ricky were outside the house. But they returned before Jennifer could flee from the place. The courts, however, noted that neither Peggy nor Roberts chose to inform the police of what happened and only came forward as witnesses to get plea deals. Although they didn't participate in any of the violence, they did help in keeping Jennifer hostage and also voted to kill her. Peggy received a sentence of 35 to 74 years, and Robert got a sentence of 30 to 70 years on March 17, 2014. The accounts of Peggy and Robert also ushered in a need for a law in Pennsylvania to charge anybody witnessing a violent crime and withholding the information from the police with third-degree murder. This law was proposed by Senator Kim Ward in 2012, and he tabled the proposal as Jennifer's Law. Speaking at the trial of the murderers of her sister, Joy Buchholder said, "Jennifer was exploited. Her kindness and her handicap made her very vulnerable. She did not have a single mean bone in her body." Jennifer's family also took the blame of their beloved's murder on themselves since they thought they shouldn't have left Jennifer alone despite knowing that she needed the love, help, and support of someone close at almost all times. The horrifying and gruesome end of Jennifer Doherty really shook one and all concerned from within. Jennifer's parents were especially devastated to know that their daughter was tortured, assaulted, murdered, and hoisted as a trophy in cold blood. To add to their grief, she was killed by the very people she trusted and someone whom she had fallen in love with. The doctors had been thinking of getting Jennifer a place of her own in Greensburg, where she could live more independently with a network of reliable friends by her side. The murder of Jennifer Doherty remains one of the most chilling cases, largely due to the brutal and senseless nature of her death at the hands of the Greensburg Six. Evidence suggests that several of the perpetrators had known mental health struggles, which could have influenced their actions. However, it's important to consider whether their mental challenges fully explain their participation in such a horrific act or if the cruelty and violence they exhibited were rooted in something darker, like a propensity for sadistic behavior. Ultimately, while mental health issues might have played a role, the capacity for such cold-blooded torture and murder seems to stem from deeper, more complex factors. Moving on to the next case.